All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody to this session on using Lifecycle Manager and the Lifecycle API to inject agility control and control into your enterprise API processes. Thanks for taking the time with us. Hopefully you'll find this interesting and informative. As we go through this session, we will be doing a demonstration of the Lifecycle Manager API, specifically around a DevOps scenario. As we work our way through, please feel free to enter any questions into the chat area, and there should be some time at the end of the session to address at least some of those questions as they come in. So without further ado, let's get started. So a little background, probably preaching to the choir here. You probably signed up to this because you already know what an API is and you're curious as to how you can make your enterprise more enterprise strength, or APIs more enterprise strength. But of course, an API is all about connecting your customers to your application. And your application or applications can be varied. They can be cloud-based, they can be on-prem, they can be mainframe-based, they can be greenfield, built from the ground up with RESTful APIs, any number of things that you might be exposing your capabilities through, but you also want to ensure that what you expose is going to be appropriately accessible, protected, and used appropriately by your potential customers. You also want to make those APIs visible to your customers so that you have the chance to perhaps market your APIs to selected subsets of your customers, or maybe if it's a broadly based API that you want to use, have generalized uptake, you might just want to get it out there and let 1,000 flowers bloom, so to speak. So again, different channels that you'll be delivering your APIs to, current capabilities around tablets, web apps, partners, integrations, etc., websites, and then future stuff, the Internet of Things coming down the road that we all need to be aware of and concerned of. And so because you have such varied possibilities with your APIs in this environment today, we do need to have the flexibility to provide the sort of granular control, the sort of granular onboarding for users of your APIs. Simple example, like financially oriented APIs. You have governmental regulations that you need to deal with. You need to conform to PCI perhaps, or for an API that deals with health information. You clearly have privacy issues there that you need to be careful about. You can't just broadly expose such an API to the world at large. And for those business partners you do choose to expose such an API to, you need to gather information for both internal corporate reporting and for government regulatory reporting purposes. So we're going to talk about how you can better enable some of these capabilities as we go forward. We think about the API platform, then we have to somehow take our internal capabilities and expose them out to the external world. And the slide that we're showing here, more of a runtime or operational focus or gateway focus, but I think it's important to talk about this because this is the end result of the API process that you are provisioning process that you're going to go through within your organization. You need to be thinking about, do we need to expose our maybe some existing SOAP APIs as RESTful APIs? And so if so, do we need to build a facade-based adapter in front, or can we just simply do a mechanical transformation SOAP to REST through the mechanisms of the gateway? We need to worry about both authentication and authorization, OAuth being a primary means for authorization these days in the RESTful world. So we need to be able to enable that, set the appropriate resource scoping, and be able to selectively expose the capabilities of our APIs to consumers on a case-by-case basis. We need to be able to understand how our APIs are running. Are the consumers using the APIs successfully? Are they using them under the agreed to service level agreements that we've established on an application by application basis? How do we deal with the case where a consumer overruns the API? We've all heard the story about a customer or a company standing up a beta API, getting it out there, getting their first consumer on board. The consumer on board swears that they will not use the API beyond such and such a level. And of course, the first week that they get out there and start using the API, they start hammering it, and crashes the back-end system, and everybody has a bad taste in their mouth as a result of those sorts of situations. So you need to protect your APIs from that level of use and abuse, and make sure that you can scale with your customers on a controlled basis. Monetizing your APIs. In some cases, APIs themselves, the invocations of those APIs, are providing value add to end customers that you want to be able to turn into revenue streams. Not all cases are like that, but that is a useful and important set of capabilities you might want to wrap around your APIs to consider. And so all these issues are relevant for exposing APIs out into the broader world and need to be dealt with. SOA software addresses this through a unified SOA and API platform that takes internal capabilities, maybe they're existing services that are built for internal purposes that you want to repurpose, maybe they're greenfield APIs that you're building for the external world, providing a governed lifecycle management capabilities around that to ensure that you're building those services correctly, shaping them correctly, assigning the appropriate types of policies for security, monitoring, privacy, ensuring that you have a supporting documentation, treating these APIs like a product, so on and so forth, so that you can get them in good shape out to the external world. Moving up the stack here, service integration addresses the need to be able to perhaps assemble composite APIs from existing capabilities. Sometimes you need to be able to pick and choose. The internal capabilities of your enterprise services and APIs are useful, but they're not structured in a way that you want external customers to onboard against. So you might want to be able to do some level of composite definition, or maybe you need to do some limited orchestration activities. So based on inbound values that come in on a message, determine where to route a particular API call to get the right results quickly. Gateway services, all the abilities that you need to talk about around supporting the API from a non-functional standpoint, security, privacy, monitoring, SLAs, ensuring that you are in fact protecting your enterprise from either excessive use or abuse by the external world. And then developer engagement, exposing our APIs out to the broader community through a portal. That portal might be open to the entire world. It might be selectively open to specific business partners. You might have a mix. So how do you deal with that sort of situation? And lastly, analytics, tracking the activity, the monetization scenario I just talked about a bit. All these capabilities you need to think about and deal with in your environment. And SOA software does provide a full product suite to address these capabilities end-to-end for your API solution. Today, however, we're going to be focused specifically around the lifecycle management aspect of APIs. So while we have the Lifecycle Manager product, the API Gateway, and the Community Manager product addressing the various layers of the API management stack, today we're focused on the back end of that stack. How do I provide the appropriate flexibility, the appropriate control over API delivery and definition to the external world? So in other words, how do I provision the gateway? How do I provision the community manager in our product suite, or in our example here, such that the APIs are ready to be properly consumed, can be understood, can be onboarded, so on and so forth. So why do I care about lifecycle management? what is relevant to me? Is an API supposed to be all about rapid development, rapid deployment, get stuff out there, learn from it quickly, let's make some money, let's do some quick opportunistic attacks in the business space, and then go from there? Well, certainly that's true, but even with that approach, you still need to understand what's going on, and you still need certain amount of control within the organization. You want to, for example, make sure that your API definitions are consistent. Are you going to establish some patterns around API operation definitions? Are you going to apply the resource-based pattern around your APIs? The traditional, get, update, delete, create the CRUD type pattern to all of your APIs and have them entity-centric? Are you going to provide more of a action verb-oriented API model? Do you need to support both models? When you do define those models, how are you going to ensure that what gets defined is consistent with your approach? Naming patterns, naming conventions, usage patterns. Documentation. Certainly a good API should be clear in terms of how the operations are to use, but you should also be providing good examples for how to use, maybe even sample code snippets on the client side to show people how to uptake these APIs. Perhaps even an SDK that's supporting easy onboarding into the various mobile platforms that you want to support if you want to target specific environments. Giving consumers an effective way to test their applications, another aspect that you need to be considering, so that you can provide them a way to initially onboard against a sandbox environment. It's production quality, but provides test data that can be validated with full test suites. So if you do X, you should get Y back. Prove to me you get Y back when you do X, and I will let you then go live. So that sort of approval mechanism and being able to capture that information, document it for reporting purposes, all that is relevant to an enterprise strength API. And the industry is definitely recognizing this. It's going there rapidly. In fact, the API maturity cycle, what we're seeing within SOA software is that the API maturity cycle is probably happening 2 or 3 times as fast as the SOA maturity cycle back in the early 2000s. Much more mature approach to API definition and development. And I think to some extent that's because organizations have learned a lot from doing SOA. And so they're applying the lessons learned from SOA in an agile fashion to the API world. So how do you get all this good stuff? How do you make sure that you treat your APIs truly as products? Well, you need to apply just enough governance. Governance often is viewed by the API community as an evil thing or an unnecessary thing because we just trust our people to do the right things. Well, that's in fact probably a recipe for disaster, if not immediately down the road when you have out of control situations that you're not able to manage and monitor. So you do need to put appropriate process in place, but the key word here is appropriate. Don't overload with too much complexity. Don't make people jump through 37 approvals before they can get their first API out the door. But by the same token, define what you must have, when you must have it, and who must look at what you must have, when you must have it in order to get those APIs out the door. It can be as simple as providing a final provisioning gate that has an architect review all the definition of the API, the work products that are expected from the API from an onboarding and documentation standpoint, the security perimeter policies that are going to be applied, and signing off on it and stating that you're good to go. It can be as simple as that. Automate what you can. Things like naming conventions, usage patterns, natural place where you can apply automated validation rules. And Lifecycle Manager does a really good job at that. and then review what you can't automate. Get it in front of the appropriate stakeholder, be it an architect, be it a steering committee, be it whatever your organization chooses to call that type of role, before you slip it out the door and make it visible to the wild, wild world of the API community, the app community at large. And Lifecycle Manager is well designed for this sort of just enough governance scenario. Very flexible configuration processes, very easy to use from a content definition standpoint, can be integrated with your back-end tooling. You're going to see an example, or at least a simulated example of that today in the DevOps world, but can also be integrated with back-end development tools like SCMs, integrated with IDEs for those who are developing perhaps Android-based applications using an Eclipse style approach to development perhaps. All this you get out of the box with Lifecycle Manager. So, with that as a background, why would you want an API over a lifecycle set of capabilities? Well, why would you build an API for anything? It's because you want ease of integration and to be able to support efficient process definition, process extension. You want to be able to support cross-infrastructure, cross-platform, support multiple end-user modes, etc., and so that you can rapidly wire these sorts of capabilities into your world at large and not be forced down a specific path that perhaps a stack vendor says is the way to go, the only way you can go. So with that in mind, we have introduced with the latest release of Lifecycle Manager a Lifecycle API to give customers a great deal of flexibility around these process definitions for provisioning services, for provisioning the runtime environment behind the services, for onboarding users into the portal, for onboarding applications for using those APIs. All these use cases are relevant. And as you would expect, the API is REST-based. It is leveraging both JSON schema and the Alpaca form markup syntax to make it very easy to consume the content that comes from the API. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. One of the challenges with REST-based or REST JSON-based APIs is that the supporting infrastructure is still forming. And so we've chosen to use Alpaca, which in turn has chosen to use JSON schema as a means to document the information coming along to make it more effectively consumable. These APIs, this API front ends, the flexible process automation engine that Lifecycle Manager gives you, and we provide this capability both through an on-premise deployment and also it will be available through a PaaS or platform as a service type approach. So typical cases where you might want to use the Lifecycle API. One case that we think is quite interesting, and in fact we've already gone into production with some of our customers, is the notion of user and app onboarding through our API portal product called Community Manager. Community Manager is designed to expose APIs to the external world, and the external world can be highly varied. Sometimes that external world is a narrowly focused set of partners that you specifically define, you invite, and bring them on board. In other cases, it is a much broader, open-ended set of consumers that you want to market to. Each of those scenarios has different levels of information gathering necessary. So, in the case where you are going to perhaps, taking us back to the financial scenario, perhaps you need to gather specific information about the user community that's going to consume your financial API for purposes of reporting. And so you need to be able to customize a form, gather that information, route it through a review process so that some internal business manager can validate that the content's right, that it's acceptable for this user group to come on board against the API, and then go ahead and let the user register into the portal. All that is easily implemented with our configurable processes exposed to the API, and we have a native solution that wires right into Community Manager when the vanilla capabilities of the onboarding process for apps or users is insufficient for your specific scenarios. Another case that might be relevant is supporting mobile-based approvals. So part of being agile is making sure that people get the right information in the format and on the platform that makes most sense for them. So while a developer probably isn't going to want to be searching for APIs using a mobile app, you might have a business manager who does need that level of access so that they can quickly see the inbound requests, understand how they're being used, and then go ahead and approve and move on with their life. So having these capabilities exposed through REST-based API, pretty useful from that standpoint. And then lastly, another example that you might be interested in, an specific example we're going to demonstrate today, is a DevOps automation example. So, what do we mean by a DevOps automation scenario? We're going to simulate a tagging and approval process for a continuous integration type environment. So you might have in your IT shop an agile continuous integration environment where API developers are pushing code up that's getting built, it's getting deployed, and at some point somebody needs to make a decision that build XYZ is the build we want to push through the staging environment to eventually get out to the prod environment to make accessible to our end customers. So how are we going to do this? We're going to use Lifecycle Manager to target a specific build. In other words, you tag it, tag that build within Lifecycle Manager. You submit it through the process, getting it put in front of the various approval role players or stakeholders. Once they sign off on it, then you push the build image out to the designated platform. Well, we don't have all that sort of environment available to us from a demo standpoint, so we're going to simulate it. And we've set up a GitHub repository instance that's going to represent where we're going to put our build output. So that's where the build executables are going to be deposited from an archival standpoint. And then rather than actually deploying an executable environment, we're just going to push a file to an Amazon S3 bucket. So that's simulating our target deployment platform. You can replace whatever target runtime you want with that. You could replace GitHub with any repository, perhaps linked in with a Jenkins build process in your own environment. So you make that mental leap as you're watching the demonstration that we go through here. All right, so let's go ahead and let's execute this. So I'm going to go ahead and share out my desktop now. And we're going to start by going to the registration point for this demonstration. By the way, you can try this yourself. Just hit this particular URL that you're seeing in my browser window, and you can come on board and try this yourself. Something to take a look at after the fact. So, go ahead and get myself registered here. And provide my GitHub user ID. Obviously, if we're going to use GitHub as the environment to simulate the build repository, you must have a GitHub user ID. If you don't have a GitHub user ID, you can go ahead and easily create one out there. There's a link right here on this page to create one, and then you can give this a try yourself. So I'll submit this, and in the background, the Lifecycle Manager automation processes are going to run and stand up the demonstration instance. So the scenario we're going to go through here at the top level is to check in a GitHub file. That will result in a form being presented to us where we can approve or reject the request, filling in some fields that we specified as part of the mandatory process. And then once we approve it, assuming we do approve it, then Lifecycle Manager will update, will actually modify the file and push it out to Amazon S3, the bucket that we set up, and all on the way getting email notifications and confirmations. So while I was talking, hopefully all that's been working in the background, and I should have a new email here. And in fact, we do. There's the first one. And this is, let me go ahead and get images populated here. So here's the notification telling me that we have successfully registered for the trial demonstration. And so I'm going to go ahead and click this GitHub link, and then I'm instructed to populate a .txt or .xml file into GitHub. We chose to use .txt or .xml so we can show some of the automation capabilities of Lifecycle Manager rather than an actual opaque file like a actual build executable. This gives us an ability to show some of the advanced capabilities that you can leverage from Lifecycle Manager's process automation. So let's go ahead and add a new file. Make an XML file here. Good enough. And go ahead and commit that. Commit that into the GitHub repository. So coming back here, that gets checked in. And then our any source asset adapter in Lifecycle Manager is going to be notified that GitHub has a new file in place. And it's going to retrieve that file, parse it, and kick off the Lifecycle Manager automation process or provisioning process. And your source asset adapter is designed for any sort of file-based repository or system of record to be able to interact with that and push content into the Lifecycle Manager. So GitHub is supported, other repositories like Team Foundation Server, Rational Team Concert, etc. Subversion, all supported, and can be used in either the cloud or the on-premise scenario. So if that worked, we should have, in fact, a new request, governance request presented to us. So we got a notification emitted by Lifecycle Manager. This email notification was populated. We've progressed through the file check-in stage. We're now sitting on the check-in approval step. So at this point, we should have a form ready to present for us, shaped by the Alpaca client side, and I can get to that form by clicking on this link. So there we go, and here is our form. So this form is dynamically generated. The Lifecycle API is presenting the form contents. It is presented with some pre-populated values. Here, for example, is a URL that will take us out to GitHub if I want to. There's my user ID, which was extracted from the notification. And we're also, in this case, the form is mandated in a couple of fields. So I must put in a comment here. And then we also need to specify visibility. So we've set up a couple of what are essentially behave like sub-buckets within S3, public versus private. So I'm going to pick private. And then I can go ahead and approve this. So again, the client-side web app is consuming the output from the API. The output from the API is tagged with JSON schema, so I can understand what the content is, and also the Alpaca forms information, so that I can generate a form like this. No coding, form-specific coding is required to produce this. This is all dynamically generated. So, approved it. We've now gone to this phase. What's going to happen now is that the automation engine in Lifecycle Manager will determine that the approval has been granted, and will take that comment that we populated into the form. It will stuff it into the XML file, and then it will push it across to S3 using the automation capabilities of the process. So let's see if that's happened here. Looks like it has. There we go. So we're to this point. I should be able to now retrieve it by clicking on this link. Let's go ahead and do that. Looks like we had a little bit of hiccup there. So that file didn't populate across. Well, it normally should have populated right across, and we'll directly access to the S3. Sorry about that. We'll take a look at that in the back end and make sure that is running successfully when you try this out yourself. All right. So let's get back to our slides and talk through what we just saw. So some key features that we saw in play here. We saw the AnySource Asset Adapter. It's designed to do rule-based scanning of file repositories to support both development lifecycle and DevOps related processes. And we have pre-built implementations for the list you see there, GitHub, CVS Subversion, so on and so forth. And it's also available as a full source framework that can be extended to any system of record that you see fit. Many of our customers wire in, say, a SharePoint site where they're using to store supporting documentation along with their SCM. And the adapter can merge those into representing services and other interesting assets that need to be governed and present them up to the governance community. Process Automation Framework, it's a fully configurable platform, supports both automated validations as well as role-based policies. It provides a flexible Bean Shell or Jython-based task extension framework. Here, you can essentially write any sort of scripted process that you wish to access both the Lifecycle Manager, local Java APIs, and any external calls, so making REST calls outbound to other platforms, etc., and wiring into external SDKs where you need to deploy them with so that you can wire your process against the other tools that you're working with as part of your DevOps processes. And all of the activity that goes on within this platform is fully auditable, fully reportable, accessible through SQL read-only views. So it's very easy for you to take the processes that you defined and expose them up to internal corporate review or to support any sort of regulatory information you need to generate for your organization. And then lastly, of course, the Lifecycle API provides easy access. We're leveraging Alpaca to make it very easy to integrate this into your own platforms and tools. Of course, you don't need to have a standalone instance, as we've shown you there. You can wire it right into your own environment, and Alpaca makes it pretty easy to extend your own applications to drop in a form like we showed you. All this can be deployed into multimodal deployment options. So pure platform as a service, the instance residing out in the cloud, and with Lifecycle Manager providing the process back in behind Community Manager with your external portal, and then the gateway providing the security, privacy, and monitoring perimeter over your services, which are presumably running back behind your firewall. Or a pure on-premise case where everything is residing in your environment and you're pushing out to external world. Or what's becoming increasingly popular is a hybrid model where you're using Lifecycle Manager and the gateway as part of your enterprise solution, but certain APIs are exposed via the gateway out to the external world and provisioned into Community Manager from a portal standpoint. So all of these options are quite easy to configure, quite viable for you, and really depends on how you want to run your business as to how you would approach using these products. So with that, let's open it up for questions. Let's see if we have any questions that have come in. So, I see that the error of my ways has been established. I didn't close my quotes on the attribute value in my XML. So that's where the error has come from. In fact, let's give that another try. Since I can't write XML on the fly, apparently. Let me go ahead and quickly share that out, get back to that example, and let's try it again. So let's push another one in. Test file 2.xml. That looks a little bit better. Commit it. Let's clean up some of these. And there's the request. So approve it. Let's clean up some of these pages as well here. And wait for that last email to show up. There it is. Now let's see if I did it right. Yes, success. So I've proven my ineptitude at writing XML on the fly. Thanks for whoever corrected me on that. Looks like I have a valid XML document, and we did in fact see the file propagated to S3 and the comment pushed into the file. And that's just a simple example of how we can automate, provide some pretty sophisticated automation features as part of the process flow. Which brings me to the next question, which is, why would I use this instead of a BPM tool? Well, because this is wired into your development and DevOps solution. You can do the types of things that I just showed you as an example. Manipulate file contents, push contents to different target audiences. That public versus private could have been used to decide where to provision, which runtime platform to provision the executable bits to. How do you want to, do you need to do further annotation of information along the way? Now, all this gives you a lot of flexibility that you don't get with a vanilla BPM solution. Lifecycle Manager is designed to support your processes and fit with your tools. There's another question. How does it fit with my SDLC? Well, typically your SDLC for an API is going to go through various gates. You might have an agile process where you do an initial requirement sign off, define your sprints, and then have minor versions that deliver operation by operation into each sprint before you're done. Lifecycle Manager provides default processes that support these sort of capabilities. It can be configured to support your own processes, your own roles, your own validation rules, with the end result being that the API you produce is going to be of enterprise strength and quality and conform with your environment. Lifecycle Manager also wires into our runtime gateway so that you can automatically assert which sort of security, privacy, and monitoring policies should be declaratively injected into the API as it's provisioned out to the external world. And Lifecycle Manager also automatically pushes the API to Community Manager, the portal, to make it visible to your community of interest that you want to be able to see the API. How do we, that lets you automate a lot of the things you're doing manually today, which is a very challenging from a systematic standpoint to scale up your API initiative. You might be able to get by with it on the first API or one or two APIs that you're pushing out, but it's important to automate as much as possible to clean up the potential for human error that often occurs as you try to scale up an effort. Why did we pick Alpaca to work with on the Lifecycle API? Another question. Well, Alpaca is a pretty nice package. It is taking the lead in defining this notion of a declarative or generated forms solution on the client side for REST JSON or JSON content. And so rather than inventing our own world, we decided it makes sense to support the open source community in its effort to mature the REST space. And so we're leveraging JSON schema and the Alpaca markup language accordingly. We think it's a good solution. And there's nothing that forces you to use Alpaca. The information that's being passed across in the API is standard JSON, fully tagged, so you can interpret it however you wish. Another question. Where can I get documentation on this? So if you go to docs.soa.com, you can get out there and take a look at not only the Lifecycle Manager API, but documentation from our entire product suite, Community Manager, the gateway, as well as Lifecycle Manager. There's a wealth of documentation out there. It's a good place to start exploring what the capabilities of our product suite are. So, another question: how can I get the information here? Can I get the PowerPoint in an email? Just be happy to distribute this to everybody who's registered to get the PowerPoint. This is also being recorded, so if you want to revisit it, go ahead and do that as well. We'll make that available out on our website. Let's see. I should be wrapping up pretty soon. Another question came in. Is it API cloud service? Will it have a platform as a service-based pricing? It does. It will have pricing. We're still working through some of the details there, but it will definitely be available as a platform as a service offering, as well as an on-premise solution. So if you're interested in a hosted solution to wire this into your own platforms, please go ahead and contact us, and we'd be happy to work with you and figure out what makes sense for your specific environment. How to extend the lifecycle automation task? Well, again, that's going to be primarily done through custom scripting tasks. The automation framework is designed to allow these tasks to be implemented using either Bean Shell or Jython and to be plugged right in the modeling environment. You modeled your processes using a drag and drop tool set that we built in Eclipse. So it's very easy to administratively configure the new forms, define the new forms, define the process and the roles that are going to be involved in those forms, and any integration tasks that you need will be typically implemented using the scripting capabilities, Bean Shell or Jython, making the outbound calls to the tools perhaps extracting information from those tools, extracting information from the repository, and doing the right things as a result to wire everything together. And that's really the power of Lifecycle Manager, is taking all the work activities that you need to do on a day-to-day basis to get an API built, tested, documented, secured, pushed out to the runtime, and ensuring that they are done consistently and in as an automated fashion as possible. So with that, let's go ahead and close this session. Oh, one more question just came in. So I've proven my inability to write good XML. How could we have prevented that from occurring? Well, another good example of the automations of Lifecycle Manager. We could very easily have put in an XML validation task in the process to check that the XML is valid and to report back to the end user that, hey, they should have, we need to fix that before we go forward. Now, we didn't do that in this case, but because we wanted to support both .txt and XML for the end user, but that's a pretty straightforward thing to be able to do. Question on Scrum just came in. Absolutely, can you use Lifecycle Manager to support Scrum-based development cycles? Absolutely, that's part and parcel of what Lifecycle Manager is well designed to do, because it allows you to separate major and minor version activities and to be able to coordinate upstream consumers of prior minor versions with the downstream activity that's coming as new operations are coming on board. And also to put discipline in the organization such that you don't break existing consumers when you're doing the minor version activity. That's an important part of Agile API or Agile service development, is to not break existing consumers over the course of the sprints that you're delivering the service. All right. Well, I think we probably covered the bases here. The PowerPoint deck will be published out on SlideShare to everyone, so we can get at that there. And again, we are recording this, so you'll have access to this as well. And please go ahead and submit any questions that you have into our website. And you can also reach me directly. Email is just first name to last name at SOA.com, so Brent.Carlson at SOA.com. If you have any specific questions about capabilities of the API or Lifecycle Manager in general, don't hesitate to email me directly, and I'll work with you to get your questions answered. And again, thanks again for your time.